I can't believe you would do this to me!
My name is Brittany Turner, and if you'd told me a year ago that my own father would publicly humiliate me in front of thousands of people online, I would have laughed and said, not a chance. I'm 32, a data analyst living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and for the past few years, I've been clawing my way back from the wreckage of a messy divorce. Numbers make sense to me. Spreadsheets, dashboards, analytics, they all follow rules. But families have their own algorithms of pride, silence, and betrayal, and I was about to discover just how cruel that equation could get. After my marriage ended, I did everything right. I worked late nights, earned new certifications, and built a small freelance portfolio that finally landed me a $10,000 contract with a local startup. It wasn't fortune, but it was proof that I was rebuilding my life, step by determined step. Still, every Sunday dinner felt like stepping into a courtroom where I was always on trial. My father, James Turner, a retired banker obsessed with appearances, ruled those dinners like a CEO of respectability. My mother, Linda, a retired teacher who once believed in kindness, had turned into his echo. And my sister, Lindsay, 3 years older and a freelance journalist, basked in the spotlight he created for her. Every time Dad bragged about her latest article in the Baton Rouge Gazette, I'd sit there smiling, the clink of silverware drowning out the ache in my chest. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Dad would say, his words casual, his tone sharp. Lindsay would chuckle softly, swirling her wine. "Maybe if you tried harder, Britt," she'd add, all sugar and superiority. Mom would nod, distracted, humming approval. Even Ethan, my younger brother, the quiet software engineer who avoided conflict like a religion, would just shrug. "That's just how they are," he'd mumble, eyes fixed on his phone. That December, I walked into my parents' sprawling home for our annual Christmas party, carrying not just a casserole dish, but the weight of every comparison, every dismissal. The air smelled like pine and cinnamon, laughter echoing from the living room where Dad held court, retelling stories of his glory days as a banker. I stood near the doorway, clutching my glass of eggnog, watching Lindsay glow under the string lights as relatives praised her latest feature article. When dinner began, the barbs started early. "So, Brittany," Dad said, slicing his roast with surgical precision, "still crunching numbers for those little startups?" "It's actually a major contract," I replied, trying to sound proud. Lindsay smirked. "Big deal. Writing something people read is a big deal." The table erupted in laughter. Mom patted her hand, glowing with maternal pride. "Your sister's latest piece was so inspiring," she said. I forced a smile, swallowing back the sting. When Dad added, "Maybe if you'd picked a real career, you wouldn't still be rebuilding after that divorce," something inside me cracked. The word divorce hung in the air like smoke. Cousins shifted uncomfortably. My face burned. I excused myself before the tears could fall. Out in the hallway, I found Ethan sprawled on a couch, scrolling as usual. "Can I borrow your phone for a sec?" "Need to check an email." He shrugged, handing it over. That's when I saw it. A notification popped up from Dad's social media account. Curiosity turned into nausea as I tapped it open. There, staring at me from the screen, was a post that felt like a punch to the gut. If you could erase one person from the family, should it be Brittany? She's a failure in her career and her marriage. At first, I thought it had to be fake. A cruel meme, maybe. But the comments, oh God, the comments proved it was real. Mom had written, "She's always been a disappointment." Lindsay added, "Family's better off without her dragging us down." Even some of Dad's old banking colleagues chimed in. Guess the apple fell far down, and at the top of the screen, a small thumbs-up icon. Ethan. My breath caught. The world around me blurred, the hum of conversation from the dining room fading into static. The warmth of Christmas lights felt mocking. I scrolled again, over 200 reactions, dozens of comments, shares. My father had turned my pain into a poll, and my family voted yes. I stumbled to the bathroom, clutching the phone. My reflection stared back, trembling hands, tear-streaked cheeks, the hollow eyes of someone who'd just watched her identity crumble. My entire professional network, neighbors, friends, even clients, followed Dad's account. I imagined them scrolling past that post, their perceptions shifting from Brittany, the data analyst, to Brittany, the family failure. When I returned home that night, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Zydiana. My heart sank as I read, "Hi Brittany, due to recent concerns regarding reliability and professionalism, we're canceling your upcoming contract. $5,000 gone." Just like that. I sat on my couch, the city lights flickering outside my window, replaying every insult, every laugh, every glance of pity. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public, weaponized. My own father had cost me months of work with one click. But grief quickly hardened into something else, something sharper. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the years of being treated like a shadow. Whatever it was, I felt it rise inside me like fire. For years, I had begged for their approval, built my career on quiet resilience, swallowed my anger to keep the peace. But that night, scrolling through that post again, I realized something powerful. I didn't need their approval. I needed justice. So I opened my laptop. I started taking screenshots, every comment, every share, every name attached. I timestamped each one. I cataloged it all into a folder I labeled Evidence. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't shaking from fear. I was shaking from focus. Because this wasn't just about a family feud anymore. It was about accountability. About proving that sometimes the people who preach family values are the first to break them. About how the modern world can turn blood into broadcast and shame into spectacle. That night, I whispered a promise to myself. They wanted to erase me. But I'm about to show them what happens when you try. The night air outside my apartment was heavy and humid, a familiar Baton Rouge stillness that made the silence feel thicker than it should. My hands were trembling, but not from fear anymore. It was that strange, electric kind of calm, the one that comes after devastation, when you've already cried all the tears you can, and what's left is a quiet, burning resolve. I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room. The folder on my desktop was already named Evidence. Inside, I saved every screenshot from my father's post, The comments, the shares, the emojis that mocked me. The timestamps all aligned within hours of the party. I even took note of how quickly it had spread, from Dad's circle of colleagues to local acquaintances who knew me by name. My mind, trained in patterns and analytics, began to map out the damage. This wasn't just family drama. This was reputation warfare. And it had cost me money. Real money. I dug through my email and found the message from my lost client again. Concerns about reliability and professionalism. Those words felt sterile and cold, but behind them I saw the echo of my father's post. It wasn't coincidence. Baton Rouge was too small for that. Word traveled fast here, especially when your father was a retired banker who prided himself on being a man of integrity. My phone buzzed. It was Holly Reed, my best friend and one of the few people who'd stood by me since my divorce. An HR manager with a no-nonsense attitude and a heart big enough to anchor me when I was drifting. "Britt, what's wrong?" she said as soon as she picked up, hearing my silence before I could speak. I told her everything. The post, the comments, the loss of the contract, the humiliation. My voice cracked only once, and it wasn't from sadness. It was disbelief that the people who raised me had become strangers who laughed while I bled online. Holly didn't interrupt. When I finally ran out of words, she spoke with the kind of clarity that cut through the fog. "That's not just cruel, Britt. That's defamation." I blinked. Defamation? Yes. They made public statements that damage your professional reputation. That's a legal issue, not just an emotional one. It was like she'd flipped a switch. I'd been so focused on my heartbreak that I hadn't even considered the law. I'd seen cyber harassment stories online, but they were always other people's problems, never mine, never family. Holly continued, her voice firm but kind. "You need to talk to a lawyer who understands online privacy and reputation law. What they did, it's actionable." Her words hit me like a jolt of caffeine. Sue my family? The idea sounded absurd, but also strangely just. "I don't even know where to start," I whispered. "You start," she said, "by fighting back. You've worked too hard to let them define your name." When we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the timid daughter from a few hours ago. Her eyes were sharp, steady, alive. Still, before lawyers and lawsuits, I had to give them a chance. Maybe, just maybe, they'd realize the gravity of what they'd done. Maybe they'd apologize, take the post down, and save what little family bond we had left. So I opened our family group chat, Dad, Mom, Lindsay, and Ethan. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before I started typing. I saw the post. "It's public, it's damaging, and it's wrong. Delete it and issue a public apology, or I'll take this further." I hit send. My heart pounded. The dots appeared almost immediately. "Dad, it was just a joke. Brittany, don't make a big deal out of it." A joke. My jaw clenched so tight, I thought my teeth might crack. "Lindsay, you're being way too sensitive. It's just social media. Get over it." Mom, no response. Her silence was worse than words. It told me everything I needed to know, that her loyalty wasn't to truth or fairness. It was to Dad's image. Then, a private message from Ethan. Hey, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just liked the post because I thought it was dumb, not serious. I stared at his message for a long moment. At least he'd reached out. But it wasn't enough. The damage had been done, and the people who caused it didn't even understand or care what they'd destroyed. The next morning, the Baton Rouge sky was gray, heavy with winter rain. I drove downtown and parked in front of a small office building with a brass plaque that read, Michael Carter, Attorney at Law, Defamation and Civil Rights Cases. Holly had sent me his contact overnight. I didn't hesitate. Inside, the office smelled like coffee and printer ink. Michael Carter was in his 40s, wiry and composed, the kind of man who seemed allergic to nonsense. He listened quietly as I explained everything, from the party to the post to the lost contract. I showed him the screenshots, the emails, the group chat. He took notes meticulously, occasionally tapping his pen against his notebook. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is textbook defamation," he said. "Public false statements causing harm to your reputation. You've got proof of publication, audience reach, and financial damage. That's a strong foundation for a case." He turned the laptop toward himself, examining the post again. "And your father's a retired banker with community standing. That amplifies the impact. His followers trusted him, so his words carried weight. Something about hearing it laid out so cleanly made my stomach turn. This wasn't just family ugliness anymore. This was a digital wound that had gone viral in my small town. Michael continued, his tone steady. "Before we file, I'll draft a formal demand letter. It'll give him a chance to delete the post and issue a public apology. If he refuses, we proceed to court." He slid a business card across the desk. "You did the right thing coming here." Driving home through the rain, I felt a strange calm. The kind that comes after deciding to stop running from your pain and turn around to face it head on. That night, I sat down again at my kitchen table, sorting through the screenshots and evidence, labeling each one by date, reach, and comment thread. The analyst in me had taken over, logical, methodical, precise. But beneath the order was emotion, pulsing like electricity. For years, I'd tried to earn their love through performance, better grades, longer hours, perfect smiles. But I finally understood something that data could never quantify. Respect isn't earned through suffering. It's demanded through boundaries. They thought posting that poll made them powerful. They thought humiliation would keep me small. But in trying to erase me, they'd given me something they could never take back. The courage to fight for myself. When I closed my laptop, the clock read 17. My room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. I whispered the same promise I'd made the night before, only now it felt like a declaration. "You called it a joke. I'll show you the punchline." The next morning, sunlight streamed through my blinds, sharp and unforgiving, like it was daring me to back down. I didn't. I'd spent the night replaying Michael Carter's words, "Public false statements causing harm to your reputation." I had the screenshots. I had the emails. And now I had a lawyer. By 9 a.m. Michael had already sent me a draft of the demand letter. It was formal, cold, and perfectly factual, exactly what my family never was. Mr. James Turner, it began. This letter serves as formal notice that the post published on your social media profile on December 24th, 2024, constitutes defamation of character toward Ms. Brittany Turner. Said post has resulted in measurable professional and financial harm. You are hereby required to remove said post, issue a public apology, and cease further dissemination of false statements within 7 days, or legal action will proceed. Reading my name on that document felt surreal, equal parts validation and heartbreak. Mr. James Turner, my father, now reduced to a legal defendant. But that's what it had come to. He'd weaponized shame. I was weaponizing truth. I printed the letter and stared at it for a while before sending it to Michael for dispatch. The moment it left my inbox, I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. The next few days were a blur of emotions, anger, guilt, resolve, recycling through me like a storm that refused to move on. I spent hours at my kitchen table with my laptop open, building what I jokingly called my reputation report. Spreadsheets became therapy. Columns labeled date, comment author, engagement, reach. Each row, a reminder that humiliation leaves digital fingerprints. By the end of the week, I'd compiled everything. Over 1,500 views in 48 hours. Dozens of shares among Dad's friends, old banking colleagues, and local neighbors. Screenshots of comments calling me a failure, the weak link, and embarrassment to the Turners. And finally, the 3 emails from clients and potential partners who'd withdrawn deals after seeing that post. In data, I'd found proof, but in proof, I'd also found peace. It wasn't vengeance driving me anymore. It was clarity. Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Michael, we've sent the letter. He's been served, he said. Let's see how your father reacts before we file. I thanked him, but deep down, I already knew how James Turner would respond. For him, pride wasn't a trait, it was a religion. And right on cue, my phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Dad himself. Dad, got your lawyer's letter. I hope you realize how ridiculous this is. You're suing your own family. All because of a joke. I typed a dozen replies in my head. None of them polite. Instead, I sent just one word. Me. Accountability. He didn't respond. But Lindsay did. Lindsay, this is pathetic. Britt. You're really going to destroy Dad's reputation because you can't take a joke. You're embarrassing yourself. I stared at her message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, I deleted my drafts and closed the app. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. Over the weekend, I met Holly at a small cafe near the Mississippi River. She was her usual calm self, but when I told her about Dad's reaction, her expression hardened. You know, Britt, she said, sipping her coffee, this is what control looks like when it's threatened. He's not mad because you're wrong. He's mad because you're standing up. Her words hit deep. Growing up, Dad's control had been a constant, his rules, his approval, his judgment. Even after I moved out, even after the divorce, his voice still echoed in my head. You could have done better, Brittany. You should have listened to me. But not anymore. By Monday, Michael and I met again at his downtown office. He'd reviewed additional evidence I'd sent, emails, screenshots, engagement metrics, and his expression was equal parts impressed and somber. "This case is stronger than I expected," he said. "You've documented everything." I shrugged. "Old habits. Data analyst." He smiled briefly. "Well, your precision's going to pay off. Louisiana laws on your side, public defamation, measurable loss, and a clear intent to ridicule. That's the trifecta." He tapped his pen thoughtfully. "Now, before we file, I want to prepare you for what comes next. It's not just about money. This process will expose your family's behavior publicly. Are you ready for that?" I took a deep breath. They already exposed me. I'm just returning the favor with the truth. That evening, I walked through downtown Baton Rouge as the sky turned orange-pink, the Mississippi shimmering beneath the bridge. I thought about how easily family could blur the line between love and control, how society romanticized forgiveness, especially for blood ties, but never taught people the power of boundaries. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Ethan. "I heard about the lawyer. I get it. Just be careful, okay?" I smiled sadly. Ethan always wanted peace, even if it meant silence. But peace without truth wasn't peace. It was submission. "Thanks," I replied. I'm done being quiet. That night, as I finalized one last report for Michael, I couldn't help but reflect on what all of this really meant. This wasn't just my fight, it was every person's fight who's ever been mocked, erased, or belittled by the people meant to protect them. The numbers on my screen weren't just metrics. They were evidence of a cultural truth. The modern family has learned to weaponize social media faster than it learns empathy. Somewhere between Merry Christmas posts and family selfies, we'd built a culture that prized public image over private compassion. My dad was its perfect product, a man who valued perception more than people. But now, perception would become his undoing. As midnight approached, I sent one last email to Michael. "Let's file. I'm ready." Then I sat back, exhaled, and whispered the words that had become my mantra. "You wanted to make me invisible. Now you'll see me everywhere." The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and rain when I walked in that morning. Baton Rouge winters were unpredictable, humid 1 hour, storming the next, and the air outside still clung to my hair like a ghost. My heels echoed across the marble floor as I followed Michael Carter into the hearing room, clutching a folder so tightly my knuckles turned white. Inside it were months of evidence, screenshots, emails, engagement data, all of it documenting how one family's cruelty had turned into a digital wildfire. Dad was already there. James Turner, the man who used to braid my hair before first grade, now sat stiffly at the defendant's table. He looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe that was just because I wasn't looking up to him anymore. Mom sat beside him, lips pressed so tight they looked drawn on. Lindsay stood behind them, arms crossed, expression polished and venomous. Ethan lingered near the back row, his eyes flicking between us like he was watching a movie he never wanted to be in. The judge entered, an older woman with calm but piercing eyes. She carried herself like someone who'd seen every kind of human ugliness and still managed not to flinch. Turner v. Turner, she announced. The sound of it sliced through me. Michael stood first. Your Honor, this case concerns a public act of defamation by Mr. James Turner against his daughter, Miss Brittany Turner. The post in question reached thousands, included false statements about her professional and personal life, and resulted in financial and reputational harm. He projected the screenshots on the courtroom monitor. There it was again, that same poll. If you could erase one person from the family, should it be Brittany? She's a failure in her career and her marriage. The comments followed in ugly procession. Mom's dismissal, Lindsay's sneer, friends' laughter, Ethan's silent like. My name burned at the top of every line, cold and pitiless. Michael pointed to the data I'd compiled. Over 1-800 views within 48 hours. Shared 23 times. Comments from professional contacts and family acquaintances. And within hours, Miss Turner lost a $5,000 contract. He clicked to the email screenshot, concerns about reliability and professionalism. I glanced at my father. He didn't look ashamed. If anything, he looked irritated, like this was an inconvenience, a bad joke gone too far. When it was his turn to speak, he rose slowly, buttoning his blazer as though formality might save him. It was never meant to hurt anyone, he said, voice steady but cold. It was a light-hearted post. Families joke online all the time. I didn't realize it would be taken so seriously. Michael didn't even blink. Mr. Turner, he said evenly, you called your daughter a failure in front of an audience of peers and clients. Would you call that a light-hearted remark? Dad hesitated, glancing toward Mom for backup. She avoided his eyes. It was exaggerated, he muttered finally. The judge leaned forward slightly. Exaggeration is not a defense when it causes tangible harm, Mr. Turner. Her tone was calm, but each word landed like a hammer. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his face, fear, maybe. Or just the realization that his image, the one he'd so carefully curated for decades, was starting to fracture. When the hearing ended, the judge said she'd take time to review the evidence before ruling. I walked out of the courtroom feeling both lighter and heavier at once. Justice wasn't immediate, it never is, but the fact that my truth was finally spoken aloud felt monumental. Outside, the overcast sky had cleared, sunlight breaking through the clouds like the world itself was exhaling. I sat on the courthouse steps, the stone still warm beneath me, when my phone buzzed again. Lindsay, you're unbelievable. Britt, you're dragging our name through the mud for attention. Congratulations, you're officially the family embarrassment and the town gossip. A few seconds later, another message, this time a call from Mom. Against my better judgment, I answered. How could you do this to your father? She said, her voice trembling, part fury, part fear. After everything he's done for you. I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. You mean after everything he's done to me? Her silence on the other end was like static. Then she hung up. As I started down the courthouse stairs, I heard someone call my name. Ethan. He jogged up, his usual composure cracked, his voice small. Britt, wait. I turned. unsure what I'd see, defensiveness or pity. But instead there was something unexpected in his eyes, regret. "I messed up," he said. "I shouldn't have liked that post. I don't even know what I thought. It was stupid. I didn't think it would go this far." I studied his face. The boy who once built Lego towers beside me now looked like a man realizing he'd let one fall. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "If you need me to testify, I will." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you know." He nodded and walked away, leaving me alone again, but not lonely. For the first time, I felt like someone in that family finally saw me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the courtroom scene in slow motion, the judge's stern voice, Dad's deflection, Lindsay's glare. Every moment pressed deeper into my chest, but instead of pain, I felt something different, resolve. I opened my laptop and went through my notes again, documenting the hearing details for Michael. I added a section titled Post-Hearing Observations. Underneath, I wrote, "Defendants show no remorse. Deny accountability. Continue emotional manipulation privately via text and call." As I typed, I thought about how easy it was for people like my father to twist cruelty into humor, for people like Lindsay to mask superiority as concern, and how often women like me, divorced, independent, rebuilding, became convenient targets for family shame. I realized then that this wasn't just a legal case. It was a cultural reckoning, one small story in a much larger pattern. Families destroying one of their own for daring to be different, for refusing to play the role assigned to them. The next morning, Michael called. "The judge hasn't ruled yet," he said, "but I'm confident. Whether or not you win monetary damages, the public record will stand. The truth is already out there." I thanked him, but part of me knew the fight wasn't just in court anymore. It was in the narrative my family would tell to anyone who'd listen. They'd paint me as unstable, vindictive, cold. I could already hear the whispers forming at church, in grocery store aisles, in group chats. But they didn't matter. Not anymore. Because the truth had left the shadows, and once truth breathes daylight, it never goes back to sleep. That evening, I sat by my window, the Mississippi glowing gold in the fading sun, and thought about what it meant to lose a family. The irony wasn't lost on me that the people who tried to erase me were the ones erasing themselves now. For the first time in years, I felt a strange stillness. Not peace, not yet, but something close to it. I picked up my pen and wrote a line in my journal. Sometimes it takes losing your family to find your voice. I closed the notebook, exhaled slowly, and whispered into the quiet apartment, half prayer, half warning. They started this in public. I'll finish it there. I didn't plan on going public. At least, not at first. I told myself I just wanted an apology, or maybe the simple satisfaction of a verdict with my name cleared. But something inside me had shifted after that hearing, a kind of awakening that made silence feel like surrender. The people who hurt me didn't just try to humiliate me privately. They made it public. So the only way to reclaim my dignity was to bring the truth into the same light they used to shame me. A week later, I sat at my kitchen table again. Same chair, same laptop, same glow of the screen that had once shown me my father's post. But this time, I opened a different window, the Baton Rouge Community Forum, a local online hub where neighbors and small business owners shared everything from recipes to news. I hovered over the Create Post button, my fingers trembling, not with fear, but with a strange, measured calm. "My name is Brittany Turner," I typed. "I'm a local data analyst, and I'm writing this not for sympathy, but for clarity. Many of you may know my father, James Turner, a retired banker and owner of Turner Hardware. What most of you don't know is that he used his social media to publicly post a poll asking if our family should erase me, calling me a failure in my career and my marriage. The post went viral locally, costing me clients and my reputation. He called it a joke, but it wasn't. It was defamation, and I took him to court for it. I paused, staring at the blinking cursor. The next lines came slower, deliberate, like each one was being pulled from deep inside me. But this wasn't the first betrayal. 2 years ago, my father asked me to invest $10,000 in his hardware store, a family venture. He said, promised I'd see returns. I believed him. I never saw a cent back, and he dodged every attempt I made to talk about it. When I finally confronted him, he called it a small family misunderstanding. But I realize now it was a pattern. Control, silence, and humiliation, all dressed up as family love. I attached screenshots of the emails, his promises, his excuses, his silence. No insults, no name-calling, just facts. Then, one final line. I'm not posting this to destroy anyone. I'm posting this because silence protects abusers, not families. The people who preach integrity should live by it. I won't be erased, not by blood, not by fear, and not by shame. And with that, I hit publish. The reaction was immediate. By nightfall, my post had hundreds of views. By morning, thousands. Comments poured in faster than I could read them. I shopped at Turner Hardware for years. Never would have guessed he'd do that. Proud of you for standing up. Baton Rouge needs more women like this. She's the problem, not him, one person wrote, but the reply thread below it was full of strangers defending me. By noon, the post had spread beyond the forum. Local Facebook groups, small business pages, even LinkedIn. Someone tagged Lindsay in a thread, questioning her journalism ethics. Her online persona, all polished interviews and family quotes, began to crack. People noticed the irony, the award-winning storyteller silent about the story happening in her own family. Mom stayed offline, as she always did. But silence doesn't shield you when the truth is echoing in every corner of town. Within days, whispers reached her church, her bridge club, her book circle. Friends who used to admire her perfect family started keeping their distance. And Dad, he couldn't hide behind charm anymore. Turner Hardware's reviews began to plummet. Comments like, "Can't support a man who humiliates his daughter online," and "Integrity matters more than nails and hammers" filled the page. I didn't gloat. I didn't reply. I just watched. Because for once, I didn't have to explain myself. The truth was doing it for me. That night, I got a text from Lindsay. You're ruining Dad's business just to play the victim. Hope you're proud of yourself. Then a voicemail from Mom, her tone sharp as broken glass. This is Lo, Brittany. Airing family business online. You've gone too far. I deleted both without listening twice. Then my phone rang again. It was Ethan. Hey, he said quietly. I saw your post. I get why you did it. I'm not mad. Those words, I'm not mad, hit me harder than I expected. Not because they excused anything, but because they finally sounded human. For the first time, someone in my family wasn't choosing sides. They were choosing truth. Thanks, I said, my voice soft. I just couldn't let him rewrite the story. I know, he replied. Maybe it's time someone told the real one. Over the next few days, the community's reaction became something bigger, something beyond me. People began sharing their own stories of family betrayal, of parents using social media to shame their kids, of children cutting ties with toxicity disguised as love. My inbox filled with messages from women who said they finally felt seen. And amid that flood of empathy, a local reporter reached out, not Lindsay's paper, of course, but a rival outlet. They wanted to cover the story as a piece on defamation and family dynamics in the age of social media. I declined the interview. The post had already done its job. I didn't need fame. I needed freedom. Within a week, Turner Hardware's windows were still open, but the store was quiet. A friend who lived nearby told me the parking lot was nearly empty most days. The bright red family-owned since 1994 banner out front had started to fade under the sun. It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. Dad had built his identity on being respected. The trusted banker, the community man, the family patriarch. And now, the same platform he'd used to destroy me had turned into the mirror reflecting his own hypocrisy. Mom's social circle evaporated. Lindsay's editor pulled her from a few assignments, citing conflict of interest. Even Ethan started keeping his distance from them, though he never said it outright. He just showed up one evening with 2 coffees and a quiet, honest smile. We sat on my balcony, watching the lights flicker across the river. You know, he said, I used to think keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. But maybe that's just how bad people stay comfortable. I nodded. Exactly. He took a sip and looked out at the water. You didn't just stand up for yourself, Britt. You exposed something we all needed to see. His words settled over me like warmth. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just my victory. It was a breaking of a cycle. Before going to bed that night, I opened the community forum again. The thread had over 3,000 likes, hundreds of supportive comments, and dozens of people sharing similar experiences. I typed a final update at the bottom. I'm done letting my family's lies define me. I've chosen to cut ties, not out of hate, but out of self-preservation. I'm moving forward, surrounded by truth, not control. If you've ever been silenced by people who call themselves family, remember this. Walking away isn't betrayal. It's survival. Then, one last line. They tried to erase me. Instead, I erased their illusion. I hit post, shut my laptop, and sat there in the dark, breathing deeply. The world outside was quiet, No notifications, no noise, just the sound of my heartbeat settling into peace. 6 months later, Baton Rouge looked different. Maybe it was just me. The same streets that once felt like a maze of memories now seemed wider, quieter, like the city had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The chaos had settled, the storm had passed, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was living on my own terms. The lawsuit never went to full trial. Michael Carter, my attorney, called one morning to tell me the words I'd been waiting for. They've complied. The post has been deleted, and the association filed a reprimand. Reprimand? I repeated. He smiled faintly. The Baton Rouge Banking Association issued a public statement condemning James Turner's conduct online. They've revoked his honorary membership. I sat there, stunned. Not because I wanted revenge, but because accountability, real accountability, was so rare. My father had always preached about reputation, values, family honor. But now, his own image had cracked under the weight of truth. Within weeks, Turner Hardware's once bustling aisles emptied. Neighbors stopped waving when he passed. Even the local paper that once quoted his business wisdom published a short, polite correction, a quiet nod to the scandal everyone already knew about. Mom and Lindsay weren't spared either. My mother, Linda, had always thrived on social currency, book clubs, volunteer circles, church picnics. But those gatherings had grown thin. Invitations stopped coming. People whispered. She knew and did nothing. The same silence she'd used to protect Dad had turned into her own undoing. Lindsay's fall was faster, harsher. The journalist who'd once written about integrity in storytelling found her credibility shredded. Her editor dropped her from high-profile assignments, and her byline began to vanish from the local press. When she did publish, the comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Readers called her out. Practice what you preach. For a woman who'd built her career on shaping narratives, losing control of her own was poetic justice. Meanwhile, I'd rebuilt quietly. My apartment was new, a bright, sunlit space near the heart of downtown, small but mine. The walls were pale cream, the furniture minimal, the desk by the window perfectly placed for the morning light to spill over my laptop. I'd landed 2 new freelance clients thanks to Holly's introductions, a nonprofit working on education analytics, and a small marketing firm run by one of Ethan's friends. They weren't glamorous jobs, but they were stable, honest, free from the shadow of anyone else's name. Every Friday, Holly and I met for coffee. She'd raise her cup like a toast and say, "To thriving, not surviving." And Ethan, he was the quiet constant. He called every few weeks just to check in, never asking about Dad or Mom. We'd talk about movies, work, or the absurdity of online culture. Slowly, gently, a bridge began to form between us again, fragile, but real. Sometimes, though, I'd still wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, as if that post were still out there, waiting for me. Shame has a long half-life. It lingers in the corners, whispering old lies even when the truth has been shouted from rooftops. When that happened, I'd remind myself of what I'd learned, something that no court ruling or apology could ever give me. Betrayal doesn't always deserve forgiveness. Sometimes it deserves distance. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with no longer needing closure. You stop expecting them to understand, to apologize, to change. You simply accept that their story is not yours to fix. That was my healing. Not revenge, not victory, just freedom. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside Turner Hardware. I hadn't planned it. My car had just taken a familiar route. The windows were dusty now, the family-owned since 1994 banner sagging from rusted hooks. Inside, I could see my father's old desk through the glass, the same one where he used to balance ledgers and brag about quarterly profits. A man I didn't recognize was behind the counter. The store had been sold. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the post, the comments, the way my mother laughed at the dinner table while I swallowed my pain and the pity faded. Consequences aren't cruelty. They're the echo of choices. I turned, walked away, and never looked back. That evening, I sat by my window, the sky painted gold and rose. I opened my laptop to work, but found myself staring instead at the blank document on my screen. For months, I'd been thinking about writing something, not another data report, but a story. My story. Not about revenge or courtrooms or digital battles, but about how women rebuild after being erased. About how strength isn't born in applause, it's born in solitude. I started typing. Slowly at first, then faster. Each word was a piece of the weight I'd carried, finally set down where it belonged, in the open. They tried to break me by turning me into a headline, but I became the author instead. The next morning, I emailed the first draft to Holly. She called me 2 hours later, her voice shaking. "Britt, this is powerful. You should publish it." Publish it? I laughed softly. After everything? You think anyone wants to read about me? I don't think, she said. I know. There are women out there right now who think silence is the only way to survive. Your story tells them it isn't. Her words lingered all day. And that night, I posted an excerpt on a freelance writer's forum under a pseudonym, A Daughter Erased. By morning, it had hundreds of likes, dozens of messages, people saying it mirrored their own lives. For the first time since all of this began, I felt something deeper than vindication. I felt purpose. A few weeks later, Ethan invited me to lunch. We met at a small cafe near the university, the same one we'd gone to as kids with Mom. He looked lighter too, like letting go had freed him, even if he couldn't admit it out loud. As we finished eating, he reached across the table and said quietly, "You know, Britt, you did the hard thing. You didn't just fight back. You taught all of us what self-respect looks like." I smiled. It took losing everything to remember who I was. He nodded. And maybe that's the only way to find what's real. When I got home, the sunset was spilling across my living room, the same soft gold that had followed me through every ending, now lighting a new beginning. I closed my eyes and whispered, not in anger, but in gratitude. They taught me what not to be. And that's the best inheritance I could have asked for. 6 months later, the story I once thought would destroy me became the reason I stood taller. Time has a strange way of sanding down pain, not erasing it, but polishing it into something that reflects light. When I look back now, I don't see the shame, or the anger, or even the courtroom. I see a woman who refused to stay invisible. It was early spring in Baton Rouge. The air smelled like honeysuckle and rain, the streets alive again after a long, quiet winter. I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee, laptop open, reading through messages from strangers across the country. My essay, A Daughter Erased, had gone viral. People had shared it on Reddit, Facebook, even LinkedIn. Thousands of women, men, and even teenagers had written to say, "Your story is my story too." One message read, "I thought I was alone. I thought cutting off my toxic parents made me a bad daughter. But after reading your piece, I finally realized it made me free." I cried when I read that one. Not out of sadness, but recognition. I knew that kind of pain, the kind that hides behind silence and Sunday smiles. I replied to as many people as I could, thanking them, listening. Because if there's one thing I learned, it's that silence multiplies harm, but storytelling heals. The Baton Rouge community had moved on, as small towns do, but the ripples remained. People whispered less about what I'd done and more about why I'd done it. Turner Hardware was now owned by someone else. The sign had been repainted. The logo changed. The Turners were no longer a name. People said with respect, just one more cautionary tale about reputation and hypocrisy. Mom and Dad still hadn't spoken to me. Lindsay tried, once, a single email with 3 words. We went too far. I didn't respond. Because forgiveness, I realized, isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about refusing to live there anymore. Ethan and I stayed close. We had dinner every other Sunday, sometimes at my place, sometimes at his. We didn't talk about our parents much, but we didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, full of understanding. Holly remained my anchor, my sister in every way that mattered. She pushed me to keep writing. "You turned your pain into purpose," she said one morning as we walked by the river. "That's more powerful than any verdict." And she was right. Because somewhere along the way, my story stopped being about revenge and started being about resilience. The more I shared, the more I learned that what happened to me wasn't rare. The online age has made public shaming easier than ever, especially within families. People use posts as weapons, likes as validation, comments as daggers. And most victims stay quiet, afraid of being called dramatic, sensitive, or ungrateful. But I wasn't quiet anymore. I began collaborating with a nonprofit Holly connected me to, an organization that helps people recover from digital harassment. I used my skills as a data analyst to build dashboards that tracked online abuse patterns and helped victims document evidence, just like I had. Numbers became more than just work again. They became tools for protection. The same profession my father mocked me for had become my weapon for good. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low over the Mississippi and the world turned gold and blue, I'd think about my dad's infamous post, the one that started it all. I wondered if he ever regretted it, if, In some quiet moment, he realized that the daughter he'd mocked for being a failure had succeeded in the one thing he never could, telling the truth. But I didn't dwell on it, because the most beautiful part of moving on isn't proving them wrong. It's no longer caring whether they notice. That spring, A Daughter Erased was picked up by an online magazine that focused on stories of family, identity, and healing. The editor called my piece raw, cinematic, and necessary. When I saw it published under my real name by Brittany Turner, I cried again. Not because I needed validation, but because for years I'd been fighting to exist in a family that made me feel invisible. And now my voice was out there in the world, unfiltered and undeniable. The first paragraph of that article read, "Some families don't break apart because of betrayal. They break apart because one person finally refuses to accept it." Those words, once mine alone, now belong to anyone who needed them. On the 1-year anniversary of the Post, the night it all began, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Holly came, of course, and Ethan, and a few friends I'd met through work. We cooked together, laughed until midnight, and toasted to new beginnings. At the end of the night, I stood on the balcony, the city lights glowing below. I thought about all the versions of me that had existed, the daughter begging for approval, the woman rebuilding from ashes, the plaintiff sitting in a cold courtroom, the writer finding her words again. They were all still inside me, not erased, just evolved. I raised my glass to the night sky and whispered, "Here's to peace, not pity." Before going to bed, I recorded a short voice message for my followers, the people who had been with me through every chapter of this story. "Hi everyone, it's Brittany. I just wanted to say thank you, not just for following my story, but for reminding me that I wasn't alone. If you've ever been betrayed by people you loved, I want you to remember this. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by how you're treated. And if someone tries to erase you, let them. Because what they erase from their world, you can rewrite in your own. I wish you peace, healing, and the courage to speak, even when your voice shakes. Thank you for listening, for caring, and for proving that kindness still exists. If my story resonated with you, I hope you'll stay, subscribe, share, and tell your truth too, because someone out there needs to hear it. I ended the recording, uploaded it, and closed my laptop. The lights outside shimmered like tiny promises. I took one last look at the reflection in my window. Not the woman who'd been erased, but the one who rewrote herself. "This isn't just my story," I whispered. "It's a reminder that we all have the power to reclaim our truth." And for the first time, I smiled without any trace of pain.